Is getting revenge ever worth it? Tell me your revenge stories. So I was working at a 7-Eleven for just shy of a year. The store was a franchise, which means it was independently owned by a Lebanese guy whose IQ is probably somewhere in the 80s. He treated us all like trash. The only person who made more than minimum wage was the useless clerk he was cheating on his wife with, who for some reason made $15 an hour. This guy never did anything by the book. If he thought it would make him more money, then the law didn't apply to him. Nobody at the store ever got lunch. We were barely afforded smoke breaks, and we weren't allowed to eat while on the clock. In California, when you work more than 5 hours without a lunch, you're supposed to get paid an extra hour's wages, which counts toward overtime. We didn't get that either. On top of that, when he did payroll, he wouldn't actually go by when you clocked in and out. He went by the schedule he wrote. So if you stayed an extra hour or two to help out when it got busy, you'd be working for free, because the hours wouldn't show up. Also, your schedule was subject to change whenever he felt like it. There were several times he wrote me up for showing up late, because he would change my shift without telling me. So, here's where the trouble starts. Whenever we would take expired food off the shelves, we'd come in the next day and he had printed new expiration dates, pasted them on top of the old ones, and put the food back on the shelves. This happened consistently, the entire time I worked there. Well, one day I'd had enough of his nonsense. I called up the health department and reported him, then emailed the corporate and filled them in on what was going on. Well, word got back to him, and when I went in the next day, I'd received a complaint. I was promptly fired. I don't know about you, but I've never worked anywhere with a one-strike policy. Here's the thing, though. Since the day I started there, I'd been keeping records. I had copies of every schedule posted and every pay stub I'd ever received. I went to the labor board that day and picked up the paperwork I needed. See, when you don't get lunches and you don't get paid the extra hour you're supposed to, the labor board can force the employer to pay you the money he owes you in one lump sum. So I filled out the paperwork and turned it in. My old boss wasn't so smug when he had to make a check for $2,600, right after receiving a hefty fine from the health department. Now I'm working to get the labor board to force him to hire me back under the whistleblower clause. If he has to rehire me, he also has to pay me back lost wages for the past few months. Also, my old coworkers get lunch now. Was the revenge sweet? It felt awesome. But that's not why I did it. I did it because that sack of things was going to keep on exploiting his employees and customers to make a buck, and keep being a worthless human being. And I felt like unless I did something, he was going to get away with it. I simply could not abide by the idea of him suffering no consequences for his actions. Bravo, man. He got his revenge and he carried out justice. I don't even know what temperature that's supposed to be served. Story 2. So I'm a middle-aged man getting divorced from a middle-aged woman who cheated on me. It's been 2 years since she took off with our 22-year-old karate instructor, and the divorce agreement still isn't final. However, about a year in, it had to be signed and all the aspects of it were retroactive, meaning immediately upon signing it, I was a miserable dad with a few thousand owed for child support and over $10,000 owed for alimony. I tried to fight the retroactive stuff, but my lawyer didn't see a way to stop it. So my ex put a lien on our jointly owned house, and froze my bank accounts, etc. My life has been hell. My credit rating is terrible and I have to file for bankruptcy. And now, 2 years after she left, the house is for sale. It's a short sale, so the banks are freaking out over every penny. They worry about how much they'll lose. And when they heard that a lien was in place, they realized they'd lose even more, because the lien has to be paid and it comes out of their share. My ex is now freaking out too because the banks didn't accept an offer. They wanted more money. My ex sent an email to her lawyer and mine, but not to me, stating that I was holding up the sale because of the lien. She demanded that my lawyer undertake some legal process to have the lien removed. I got the delicious opportunity to tell her that I liked having the lien there. If the house sells, my back owed money is paid off, and if it doesn't sell, well, I have to declare bankruptcy anyway. So it doesn't matter. She's now going crazy in email, lashing out at everyone. Story 3. I once started a tech company and developed a very marketable product. Being a techie who couldn't sell his way out of a paper bag, after about 4 years, I eventually found a couple of partners to work with to help market and promote a business based on my tech and take things to the next level. They didn't buy their way in, my first mistake, and our contract wasn't written with adequate protection for me. My second mistake, since we were all friends and I never thought anything bad would happen. We still had our day jobs and things were progressing nicely on building a business while we each still had day jobs. We were starting to be successful and edging towards the ability to make a quit-your-job kind of money. After a while, my partner started acting strangely and started floating the great idea to form a new business. Form a new LLC and roll out our existing successful business into it as one of their offerings, which we would all make zillions from. They talked it up for weeks and eventually sent me a lengthy and confusing contract to sign. I knew right away the ideas for the other offerings for the new business were losers, and got the suspicion that the only reason they wanted to do this was because they wanted to exploit the revenue from the existing emerging business and do away with me in the partnership. I smelled a rat, and my spidey senses were tingling. Since one of my roles was systems admin, I spent one afternoon perusing their email on our server, and in a matter of minutes, I found hard evidence of their plot to perform the aforementioned merger and promptly make use of a clause which would allow them to vote me out and leave me high and dry. It certainly explained why they were champing at the bit for me to hurry up and just sign the new contract already. Closer scrutiny of the proposed contract showed that they would have been able to mess me out of the deal with no payout and leave me with nothing. They were going to shaft me out of 8,000 hours of development time and were going to be making money off my technology for who knows how long. I immediately picked up my jaw off the floor, did some research, went to a lawyer, and devised a plan for me to be able to walk away from the partnership and operate the business on my own. This was tricky and took way too much time and money because of the lack of protection I had due to a lousy contract between us. I was successful. I was able to oust them, and I still operate the business to this day, all on my own. Here's the revenge part. My now former partners went on to start their new business. One of the evil partners still had a day job as VP of sales for a company in the same industry as the new company they were building. I won't say who or what industry, but this was a clear conflict of interest in a narrow business space. This person was mining the Rolodex and stealing clients away with the goal of jumping ship and running the new company with a purloined client base. I knew all of this, and this was one of the reasons I didn't want to merge companies to begin with, since this behavior was illegal, unethical, and just plain icky. I waited a suitable amount of time to distance myself from the situation, then sent a package to the owner of the company for which the evil partner still worked and provided evidence to their efforts to undermine and steal all their clients. Results were as expected. Evil partner was fired and sued. This was years ago, and every time I remember what almost happened to me and the events that I dodged, I just laugh and thank my lucky stars. The fact that I was able to give it right back to evil partner makes me smile. So yes, revenge can be satisfying when applied to well-deserving schmucks. Moral of the story, even if you have to trust in your partners, money changes things. Get a lawyer and have a real contract written up to protect yourself. Don't try to mess over your partner if they can read your mail, or at least use Gmail when doing so. Reading others' mail is wrong. Don't do it, unless you have to. Having people, who are supposed to be your friends, steal and profit something you built with your own sweat and tears would probably have hurt worse than any breakup. Story 4. Long story short, maybe. Well, my girlfriend of then 6 years and I had broken up. Well, more accurately, she had broken up with me. This was 4 months after us moving across the country from NJ to CO under her request, so she could live near her parents. I'd gotten a job, but other than that, I was a stranger in a strange land. She asked me to move out of the apartment that we had just gone, even though her parents lived right down the street and she could easily go live with them. She could not afford her apartment on her own. I could, and she eventually did jump ship and I lost my deposit. And I had nowhere to go. I pleaded with her to give me the apartment. She didn't care. Her whole mentality through the whole thing was that she was not giving an inch for any reason, even if it was for the benefit of everyone. Anyhow, one day I went back to our place to talk to her. I really wanted her back and I couldn't understand why, out of the blue, she didn't want to be with me after 6 years or so. I kept asking her if she was with someone else, because, to me, that would be the nail and I would just move on. But she insisted over and over that this wasn't the case. Sometime during this conversation, she said she was going to go to my friend's house and have him come pick me up. I had nothing. I sold everything I had, including my car, to get us to Colorado. This friend had dropped me off there after I requested he do so. I was living on his couch and many others, so at this point, my ex went to get him to come get me. When she was gone for some unknown reason, I decided to check the voicemail. The first message went something like this. Hi, Tina. Listen, you need to change your voicemail. It says we are not home, and well, if Alex calls and hears that, he's going to know that you've had a boyfriend the whole time you've been dating him. And that is how I found out. I was devastated and fuming angry at the same time. The truth. It finally came out and she'd been lying to me and cheating on me this whole time, and she dragged me across the country, by happenstance, to do it. So I did what any rational person would do under these circumstances. I changed the access code to voicemail, and then changed the outgoing message to, "Hi, this is Halbowitz. Unfortunately, I'm not at home right now because Tina has been unfaithful to me and has been sleeping with a guy named Alex. Of course, she never fessed up to it and thought it would be easier to just kick me out of the house and home with nothing more than the shirt on my back and her lies denying her infidelity in my head. And I also said some other choice things. But for the most part, that is the message I left. Well, since the phone was in my name, she had a hard time getting that message off the voicemail. So for weeks after that, anyone who called when she was not home was greeted with that message. And since she didn't have much of a reason to call her own number and hear the message, she didn't know I had changed it for some time and was livid when she found out. I'll admit, though, I did get a small amount of satisfaction from it. She did everything she could to make the breakup as rocky as possible while I bent over backwards to appease her. So this, as small as it was something for me to hang my hat on. For the record, I'm rather sure she didn't know the guy until after we moved to CO, so it's not like she had a plan. Story 5. When I was in 4th grade, we took a class trip to the Symphony and I loved it. If you've ever heard a live symphony, then you know how amazing the sound is. I'd never heard something that awesome before and was so excited that I turned to my friend next to me and made a comment. Something like, "Wow, this is totally rad." Well, there were 2 girls sitting behind us and they complained to the teacher, saying that my friend and I had talked through the whole performance and ruined it for them. Well, my buddy and I got in some serious trouble for that and we had to sit in detention for several recesses. Detention was super boring. No talking or reading. You just had to sit there. With nothing else to do, I plotted my revenge. The next week, I brought some chocolate-flavored X-Lax to class. I apologized to the girls for being such a terrible disturbance during the symphony and offered them the chocolate just before class got started. First hour passed without any action, but in the middle of math, things got interesting. It's important to say that our teacher was a pretty old-school authoritarian and had a very strict hall pass policy. Only one student out at a time. So as the girl started to squirm and act uncomfortable, I told my friend to take the hall pass. Almost immediately, the girl's hands went up, asking to use the bathroom. No go, as my buddy had the hall pass. They squirmed and pleaded and begged, and still, our teacher wouldn't let them go. And then that magical moment I hadn't dared hope for. In the middle of reviewing our multiplication tables, they soiled their pants. So awesome. So much win. Everyone in the class nearly passed out laughing, then nearly passed out gagging. It was soon revealed that I was responsible and I was sent to the principal's office and my family was threatened with criminal charges. But the months of teasing that those 2 little chicks endured made it worth it. Story 6. Some details changed because it involved celebrities. When I was on my first trip to India, I was mistreated by a photographer. The guy was a schmuck on many levels and constantly defended his actions against me by saying, "Hey, at least I didn't touch you." On a non-mistreating level, he constantly uses people, including his distributors, lying and making up sob stories about his past. Anyway, he knew I would be going to China where I would be visiting a very famous photographer who he considers his idol and greatly admires and aspires to be like. All of a sudden, he changed his tune, flattering me and everything, gave me a copy of his portfolio, begging me to give it to this photographer when I met him. I took the portfolio. Fast forward a few years. This photographer and I are good friends and I met the schmuck again. We start talking and I'm pretending that everything's happy and wonderful. I mentioned that I met famous photographer. His eyes lit up. I talk about famous photographer for a while and schmuck is obviously getting jealous. Then I act as if I've suddenly remembered something. "Oh, remember how you gave me that portfolio to give to photographer?" And he said, "Yes?" So excited and expectant. I didn't give it to him. Schmuck. What? Me. I didn't give it to him. I did, however, warn him and all of his students and colleagues not to work with you as you're a liar who uses people and can't be trusted. Then we went out for drinks. Schmuck. What? Why did you do that? Me. Today's lesson is, if you're going to treat someone like trash, I highly recommend not asking them for major favors later. The alternate lesson is, if you're going to treat someone like trash, you might want to avoid trying to mistreat someone who works very closely with people who are the key to your future as a celebrity. Oh, there's my phone. Bye. He looked broken. It was beautiful. Story 7. Revenge is an art form. It has an impact, and is needed to keep the karma revolution going. Here's the situation. In college, my neighbor was crazy. She would call the cops on us and even made me and my roommates go to mediation over nothing. We never knew she had an issue with us. Never ever called me, never even hinted at any issues she had with us. So, after making our lives a living hell, dealing with the cops on a daily basis from anonymous calls and ridiculous allegations, I decided to take some revenge and make her life a living hell as well. I went to a nearby record store that had magazines, Tower Records, and took out all of the subscription postcards out of every magazine, about 270 to be exact. Went online and had labels made from a neighbor's address, got our roommates together, and while drinking a few drinks, we pasted her address to all the magazine subscriptions and checked that bill me later box. Well, I hope you can imagine what happened next. It took her over 2 years to unsubscribe to all, although I think she gave up. She would have to write letters to each magazine provider and then credit her if she missed payments. Lo and behold, she moved. Moral of the story, karma's a witch. Story 8. About 7 years ago, I stole my friend's girlfriend. His words. He blamed me or us for ruining his life. She ended up dumping me in June last year. Reasons kept changing at the end, and she led me on with what started as a need space, then need own apartment, then break up. My policy is the best revenge is to live well. It just so happens she's a little insecure and frankly, a bit nutty, and she was always jealous of my success. I got a better job, dated a bunch, and had some fun. She kept the same job, but her pay was decreased. She's dating a guy that's really not all that great now. She disowned most of her mutual friends over the past month because she feels they abandoned her and took my side by hanging out with me and my new girlfriend, which would be understandable had she not been bringing her new guy to gatherings for months. The final revenge will be when I get back the car I sold for the money to get her an engagement ring, which I never bought. I've been very, very mature about this whole situation, but I plan an active public campaign of gloating once I get it back. Story 9. When I was 8 years old, a girl at school tried to tie me with a skipping rope. I broke free and broke her skipping rope in the process. She proceeded to tell on me to the teacher, probably because she was a good girl and I was a little schmuck, evidence of this fact in a moment. The teacher believed her and ordered me to either fix the girl's skipping rope or buy her a new one. Sensing an opportunity, I said I'd fix the girl's skipping rope. It was one of those hollow rubber ones, a bit like a hose with rubber handles at either end. The fix was to stuff the hose back into the handle, fixing it in place with crazy glue. I, however, used inferior wood glue so that the handle would break off again. I know what you're thinking. A subpar repair does not make a very good revenge story. Well, she soon figured out what 8-year-old boy she shouldn't mess with when the handle broke off and the grape juice I'd filled the entire length of skipping rope with came flying out all over her and her silly little skipping friends. Story 10. So I'm a 21-year-old in college. Back as a freshman in high school, I was a skinny, 120-pound Asian kid who liked playing Pokemon and staring at the hot girls in class. Anywho, this older kid named Greg would always try to get in my face in the hallways and shove me and try to get me to retaliate. I would always walk away and never do anything back because he was large, and I had a tendency to get roughened up. One day, I just couldn't take it anymore, and when he came at me, I managed to shove him hard enough to make him stumble into a locker. As I was walking away, feeling good about myself, he hurt me straight in the back and everyone saw it. Fast forward 4 years. I'm a freshman in college and I had just won my amateur MMA debut, and guess who I ran into at a party in our town? Good old Greg, who's now a user and a complete loser. When he saw me, he tried to give me the usual tough guy attitude and tried to shove me around a bit, at which point I proceeded to roughen him up senseless. He avoided everyone for weeks after. Did I feel bad about it after? Babies don't sleep this well. Tyler Durden. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 11. I had a D-bag roommate in college who lied all the time. There were 3 of us in the house. This guy was cheap as hell. Only paid the rent, didn't want to split costs for a washing machine or an answering machine. Wanted to use some online service. This was in the early 2000s. Me and the other roomie, who ended up being my best friend, split the costs in the washing machine and answering machine. D-bag roomie ends up using both without ever paying for it. He would make up stories about himself and put others down to make himself look better. He took his videos and put them in my room when I was away, and he would tell visitors that I had a bunch of videos and that it was all mine. He was an expert manipulator. I got to the point where he was making up so many things about me. I'm pretty non-confrontational, so I never called him out on it. I was really depressed because it was affecting my relationship with my other friends because of all the things he was making up about me. He eventually put himself in a situation where he did something stupid. He bragged about it to me. When he realized that he was going to be in trouble, he had the audacity to beg me not to tell anyone. With my best poker face, I told him I wouldn't. Then I thought long and hard about it. And in the end, I told my friends. I only had to tell one. It started a whole chain reaction where his web of lies came crashing down. He was completely alienated. I had a chance for revenge and I took it. I don't know if I'm proud about it or not. The end result was that I ended up exposing a schmuck for what he really was. Story 12. While I was deployed overseas, my then-girlfriend at the time was having intimacy with many different men while pretending to be the loving, trustworthy girlfriend to me. She even went so far as to tell me she was mistreated and that she was pregnant, supposedly mine, and had a termination. Still in the dark about all of this, I get back to the States and I'm expecting her to be arriving in a flight and drive the hour to pick her up. Come to find out that she wasn't even on a plane and the whole thing was made up. I called her mother while I was at the airport and asked to speak to her. She just woke up from a nap on the other side of the country and I had the pleasure of catching her in her lie. A couple weeks later, after hearing all the lies and BS her sister was making me aware of, we hook up, and during the act, my ex walks in. It was priceless seeing her face as I was with her sister. Couldn't have felt better after evening the score as well as I could. So after my ex walks in, she tries to stop her sister and me. We didn't know that she came home with her mom, and when she saw what was going on, she grabbed my ex, hauled her out of the room, and slammed the door behind her. We finish, somewhat quickly, and walk out to a full-on car fight between my ex and her mom. Picture 2 cats in a bag, and you'll have an idea of just what this looks like. Her entire family knew what she had been doing to me and felt she deserved no less than what she was getting. Of course, her dad was ready to end me, but I didn't stay long enough to have that chat with him. Story 13. At this point, this probably won't be read, but here it goes. When I was 21, I just moved to a new city into a townhome-style apartment with some friends of mine. We all had jobs at a tire factory and as such, worked shift work. When we moved in, we were given very explicit parking spots that were conveniently unmarked. These parking spots were not in front of our townhouse and were in a few buildings down. Fast forward a few months. The king of schmucks moves in a few doors down from us, right behind our parking spots. This guy was a real schmuck. I overheard him making fun of our neighbor's daughter one time about how it must be tragic to be ugly and knowing nobody would ever want to touch you. Anyway, my roommates and I were working nights one time, 7 p.m. to 7:30 a.m., so we generally slept the days away. It was early spring, all the snow was melting, and the city issued some signs saying that the streets had to be cleared on X day from blah to blah, so they could clean the gravel or rocks or garbage from the winter months. Our parking spots weren't on the street. They were in a parking lot off the street, so we parked and went to sleep like normal. We wake up, go to do our regular routine, and boom, vehicles are all gone. Do some calling around, find out they were towed. So we go through this hassle of finding a way down there, paying the fees, and getting our vehicles back. Between the cab rides, tow fees, tickets, and a few missed work hours each, this ended up costing us around $500 each. There were 2 of our cars towed. D-Bag McGee ends up telling us in passing the next day how he forgot to move his cars. So we called the cops and reported that he couldn't park off the street because somebody's illegally parked in a spot. Turns out the police ran our plates, got our address, which was just down the street, and apparently tried ringing the doorbell, which none of us heard because we were sleeping. I'm not sure about my roommates, but I was still adjusting to shift work and slept with my AC on plus earplugs. So yeah, we were pretty mad about all of this. We had a few conversations on how we could get back at the schmuck. One night we came up with this. Schmuck had a pretty decent girlfriend. I'm not really sure why she was with him. Regardless, we followed his schedule for a while. His girlfriend was out of the house the same times and the same days working, Tuesday to Saturday, 8 to 4:30. We staged a few fake pizza deliveries, and this dude never answered the door if she was home. Easy enough. So on Monday that summer, we called an service. We told this chick exactly what to say in certain situations, etc. Took about 2 hours of coaching and going through mock situations, but it played out flawlessly. Cost us $100 an hour for 3 hours. We send her over there, she knocks, girlfriend answers. Girlfriend opens the door. Escort with a stunned look. Oh no, is Tuesday tomorrow? Girlfriend then started questioning why some chick is coming around, but we gave this chick answers to everything. She started talking about how she's been coming every Tuesday for months. Things start getting louder. Schmuck is at the door at this point, saying stuff like, "Baby, I have no idea what she's talking about." Then the starts talking about dates she came over, that this chick was out of town. Nothing a random person would know. After they started yelling at each other, they took off, blowing off the situation. There's no way any person would admit to seeing an every day for months, so he was pretty much doomed. They were arguing at each other for a good 10 minutes before they took it indoors. She moved out by Friday. Mission accomplished. And for the record, I feel absolutely no guilt. It helped that I worked with this chick at a future shop, didn't know her schedule, and we later hooked up. Awesome. So we spent more money to get him back? I applaud his money-throwing away skills. Story 14. A few years ago, a guy came to my house and started pushing me around because he'd heard I'd said something bad about his mother. Shocked, I grabbed a large wrench from the side of me. You have to realize this guy wasn't exactly big and strong, but had a reputation for being a bit of a hard guy. Although he really wasn't, and I was well known as a guy that had held a black belt in karate for several years. But I'm a laid-back guy, so I didn't want to fight in the first place, nor did I think having a fight with a guy who was part of a gang was a particularly good idea in the long run. After seeing me arm myself, he quickly fled the front garden to stand near his friends. I asked what was going on, and he explained the rumor to me, and I told him it was BS, and his friends even admitted making it up to see this guy get roughened in a fight by me. At this point, I just couldn't fight the guy. He was clearly scared of fighting me in the first place, and his whole reason for wanting a fight was made up, and he just realized his friends weren't exactly good friends. It would be wrong to give him a lesson on top of all that, so I let it go. Told him to take off, and I said if he keeps living his life like that, causing fights wherever he goes, one day karma's going to come and bite him in the back, and that, no matter what, you're going to look back at today, and even though you're the only person who got a hit in, I'm always going to be the person who won for being the bigger man and walking away. These are still the last words I've ever said to him, much like in your story. Fast forward to the next day and he's not in school. I saw a friend of his who looked terrible that day, almost in tears, so I asked where he was today, expecting to feel a bit of bravado and secretly hoping he was scared of me now. I'll never forget the moment when I found out somebody was provoking him over our fight and how small he is now in everybody's eyes for starting a fight over nothing. He ran across the road to confront this individual and got hit by a car. For weeks, the school was full of talk of how he was going to pass away and that he's never going to wake up from his coma. But fortunately, he did. I would never wish that on him or his family. We're all lovely people, and even today are still traumatized by the events and still dealing with the consequences. I never fully recovered. I bumped into him a year later, still wheelchair-bound, still doesn't have a full control and still in pain every day. He was pale and gaunt. I could tell he has been wasting away in that chair for some time now, and he looked in the eyes until he saw my face, and a flash of shame flickered across his face when he remembered who I was. He put his head down, and all he said was, "You was right," and he rolled away. I was in tears at this point, and I still get upset thinking about it now, some 7 years later almost. What started as him getting revenge for his mother, albeit misguided, has destroyed the life of his family who had spent years of life caring for him and cleaning him, basically waiting for him to pass away, which he will do one day, soon enough. The person who provoked him to go running across the road was never the same again. He had counseling for years, but eventually ended it all, and even I still feel guilty for how it went down to this very day. If my words haunt me so much still, there must be a ringing in his head constantly. All that for revenge for a comment a friend made. Such a waste of life and an utter destruction of another who is unfortunate enough to now have to live with the consequences. Story 15. They say revenge is like drinking a poison, hoping for the other person to pass away from it. Best revenge is to walk away. Seriously, anyone messed up enough to mess me over will fall flat if I step away. I've only had a few people in my life worthy of revenge, and it always paid out to let them do what they did with maximum force. Once you start doing revenge fantasies like a Kurosawa film, Lone Samurai on a horse and all, you'll look like a damn fool, because that's only for the movies. I've come close to temptation. Buddy, I came damn close. Years and years ago, back in the BBS days, there were these guys on a rival BBS who decided to mess with me. I never knew why, but they pestered me with phone calls, stole my mail, bothered me at work, and so on. Their hinge belief was that I was a liar and they were going to prove it. Sadly, I worked for a company who had some serious security policies, and when they started messing with me at work, the law got involved. We settled out of court, and part of the settlement was to drop the whole thing, which is why I won't get into it. Although one lost his job and another lost his security clearance as a result. I guess that was kind of a revenge, but again, I did nothing. The company was the one who prosecuted because someone is pestering one of our prime security targets. But what I wanted to do was insidious. I was a telecom programmer. I had access to some of the largest call centers in the world. Here's what I wanted to do. And let's say two of the people were named Dave and Jane. Disclaimer, this is 1990s technology. This might not work anymore. I had Dave's and Jane's phone numbers. I had access to a huge call center in Jacksonville where calls were routed by a complex formula of call priorities, agent groups, and contracts of so many calls had to be answered in X time. What I would have done is taken one of the trunks and programmed one of the phone numbers, let's say Jane's as part of the outgoing group. Given the time of day and percentages, Jane's number would be selected and forwarded about 2 to 3 times an hour during peak call times, and possibly none during non-peak. But since this was not assigned to an agent, there was no code for pickup, so the call would be passed blindly. There would be no response since Jane was not a call center, and when she hung up, the call would end. The caller to the call center would get the menu, get forwarded to Jacksonville, and then go to what sounded like silent space. Eventually, the customer would get angry, hang up, and call back. Jane, on the other hand, would get 2 to 3 calls an hour around lunchtime, and then from about 5 p.m. to 1 a.m., she'd pick up the phone and then hear silent space. Then, I assume, hang up. But it gets better. I could program the ANI, caller ID, to anything I wanted. So I'd put Dave's number there. Dave was married and so was Jane, but to different people. Dave and Jane used to be together years prior and were still good friends. She'd probably call Dave back and go, "What?" Dave would deny he was calling her, of course. After a few nights of this, either Dave or Jane would call their phone company because, damn it, Dave's not calling her. She can't block the number either, because Dave's number is really not calling her. That's just what shows up in her caller ID. It was really some untraceable 888 number. Dave and Jane's relative spouses might also be suspicious. The phone company probably would think they were lunatics. They would have no record of them calling one another. Of course, eventually they'd find out someone was calling Jane, but phone companies are notorious for not caring. And suppose they did. Suppose they were hot in the case because Jane was a very important customer. They would eventually trace the calls to a trunk in Florida. Then, if they still cared, they'd find out that it was a call center. I would call the main line there and get some of the most incompetent techs that still were able to function as adults without nursing care. I doubt they'd care either. But maybe one would. I need to have a telecom technician take a look at it. Guess who that was? I'd get a call. Bell Atlantic says that one of our outbound trunks is calling someone. Can you look into this? Of course I can. Then I'd move it to Ogden or Phoenix or Oklahoma or even the Philippines. Hell, I had 13 call centers to choose from. The end result was Jane would have to get a new phone number, which back then was costly and a pain in the back. If I made it her cell number, this was before you could transfer numbers, so she'd probably have to break the contract and get a new carrier. But I thought about it and decided not to, given the 0.01% chance I would have been found out. Then, buddy, I'd be in trouble, and I didn't want to stoop to their level. Eventually, Jane was one of the ones fired from her job for her antics against Punk Walrus and his company. That was good enough for me. Story 16. This will probably get buried. Oh well. I've not yet had the need, but a couple of ones I've been told about spring to mind. My dad shared a wall with some noisy neighbors. They decided to have an all-night party, and the sound came through the wall and kept him up. Dad had a reel-to-reel tape recorder, which would store hours of audio, so he set up a microphone, recorded a large section of the party. Then around 6 a.m. the next morning, he pushed the speakers up against the wall, hit play, and went out for the day. The neighbors were livid about the noise keeping them up. A friend of my dad's had neighbors above him who were inconsiderate and loud all the time. A creative guy. He installed a hook in the ceiling and floor and used a turnbuckle to tension a cord between the two. He then played the cord with a cello bow. He could tune it, and the noise it made was a deep hum. Since it was using the whole frame of the room as a sounding box, nobody could work out where he came from. General car revenge ideas. Some raw fish or prawns in a blender, reduced to a thin slurry and poured under the carpets or into the cabin air vents would be almost impossible to get out of a car. The stench would be phenomenal. I've always fancied the idea of leaving a block of Parmesan or other smelly cheese in someone's engine block. As the car heated up, it would melt all over the car and start to burn. I've also never hated anyone enough to attempt the above. What the hell am I talking about? I did once perpetrate revenge of a prankish sort. My friend was annoyed with me, as I told him I was traveling interstate and overseas a week later, but hadn't told him why. He was emailing me to ask why I was traveling. I was busy and was planning on emailing him later. Before I got the chance to reply, he wrote to me saying, "Hope you enjoy the prank." I wondered what he meant. Then the email started. What he had done was tell a large number of people, friends, acquaintances, and some strangers that I was traveling for treatment for cancer, having been recently diagnosed. A girl who had recently been diagnosed with MS wrote to me, offering her sympathy and a shoulder if I needed it. I felt awful. I felt angry. Word got around that I was okay, but I was still angry and baffled that he thought it was funny. Sometime later, I had to visit his house and he was out. My friend and I managed to break in. We took all the drawers out of his dresser, inverted them, and put them back so everything spills out when you open them. I changed his computer's desktop and homepage to explicit images. I also installed a fake format program in his startup folder. It looked just like the real thing, but when you clicked cancel, it proceeded to run an exact copy of the format process, including thrashing the hard drive. It was scary, even when you knew it was fake. I didn't know he had no backups of his copy's writings. He started backing up after this scare. He called me later, livid. The intrusion had annoyed him. The fake format thing had almost stopped his heart. When he calmed down, he said that I owed him some revenge. Oh, and I married this girl with MS. Story 17. I live in a small suite-style dorm and was given a random roommate. She had little interest in me and would usually ignore me. The amount of food she wasted made me want to cry. To give you an idea, she made pasta noodles, and instead of storing them in the Tupperware containers I bought, she left them out on the counter for 3 days, assuming they would dry back to their original state, then threw them out. I had to make my own fruit fly traps for all the leftovers. During Christmas, she left me with all of the trash to clean out, even though it was entirely her food. Eventually, my roommate gets herself a boyfriend. He came over to her room all the time, like they never alternated. It was always that room. There was a vent between the two rooms, which made their giggly, flirty, kissy intimacy and whatnot beyond frustrating. To give you an idea, the sound of kissing is now a pet peeve of mine. It makes me cringe and I get extremely angry. I tried to drown them out with Team Fortress 2 blaring and turning up my music and sleeping with headphones, but still to no avail. So one day I decided to have a TF2 LAN party in my room for my roomie to come back to. That was all fine and dandy until some other friends came along with a massive table that barely fit in the main area, brought a smoke machine, and started playing poker while listening to old 50s music. She came in late and found a bunch of random men. I'm the only girl in this room. I'm in my bedroom with the door closed playing there. So she's completely freaked out and assuming they're smoking. The boyfriend clues in faster and spots the smoke machine. After a moment, I come out and say hello to her as normally as possible. They go into their room, squeezing uncomfortably around the table and into their own bedroom. We stayed there until 5 in the morning. I go on the next day as if nothing happened. On the last day of school, I left before her and let her clean up her own mess. I also took the router that the two of us bought and never spoke to her again. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.